We are an hour from the closing bell on what has been a very volatile day on Wall Street. The market opened lower, a sharp fall at 2, a sharp fall at 12, and a rally in the late afternoon. Just look at how things are going. Only the 4 defensive stocks are above the parapet. Otherwise, everything's in the red, with the technology stocks, some of them losing the most. The broader market is down. The Nasdaq is off sharply, the best part of 2%. We need to understand why. In other words, these are the drivers of the day. From Saudi Arabia to Shanghai, markets are finding reasons to sell. The volatility is back. Steve Mnuchin, US Treasury Secretary, staying home as more ministers are dropping out from the Davos in the desert. It begs the question, who will be there? And the never-ending Brexit story. Europe says it'll give Britain another year to leave. Or maybe not. Live from the world's financial capital, New York City, on Thursday, October the 18th. I'm Richard Quest. I mean business. CNN breaking news to bring you right at the top of our programme. A new development in the case of Jamal Khashoggi. In a statement given to the network, CNN, his family says they consider Jamal to be a missing person and that they have no legal or official proof to believe otherwise. The family says Jamal was never a dissident and they have been in close contact with the Saudi government at the highest level. The first tangible punishment from the Trump administration over the disappearance and apparent or alleged murder of Jamal Khashoggi seems to have now roiled the market. It was after the US Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, said he will not attend the Saudi Investment Summit. Now, you can see this if you look at the clock. That first sharp fall comes roughly the same time as we're hearing about. That's around about 11:15, right the way through until 12:30, 1 o'clock, when you start to see a rally and then down again. Mnuchin made his decision after meeting President Trump and the Secretary of State. His announcement, combined with the fears about trade, tech and Europe, made a bad day worse. At the lowest point, the Dow was off more than 471 points. Just I'm looking at the note, down some 1.83%. The Russell 2000, which is the broader market, even became 10% lower overall, the 10% from the recent highs. The Nasdaq today, Alison Kosick is following market developments. Alison, the Nasdaq at one stage was off 2.5%. Now, as we go into the crucial hour of trade, what is the feeling?
The feeling is this is no doubt a volatile market, and as usually the trend is, we see in the final hour of trading, things get even more volatile. Now, the Dow is holding solid, 360 points down, but it has been wavering back and forth. The reality is this is a market that is ridden with anxiety. Even before Steve Mnuchin decided to pull out of the conference, the big worry that the folks here on the floor are seeing about him pulling out of the conference is it could be opening the door to confrontation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And as you know, Wall Street does not like confrontation. Now, interestingly enough, when you think about that confrontation, you think about business ties, because the U.S. and Saudi Arabia do big business, billions of dollars each year. In fact, already this year, the U.S. has lent Saudi Arabia $11 billion. But when cooler heads prevail here in talking with some of the traders, they think that that's just fear-mongering, that some of the business ties could be severed, especially as we heard from BlackRock's CEO last week or in the past few days saying he would not pull any business from Saudi Arabia. One more thing to mention, got to talk about oil, because everybody's wondering, well, why is oil down if tensions are heating up between Saudi Arabia and the U.S.? The thinking is that Saudi Arabia will want to give an olive branch, take the pressure off, put more oil into the market instead of trying to push oil to an $80, $90 a barrel limit to kind of play nice in the sandbox as these tensions escalate. Richard.
Alison Kosick, thank you for the update, putting it into the broad picture of what's happening. We now need to look at the Quest Means Business Trading Post. Now, as I alluded at the open, first of all, no records in Europe or here, so we can put that behind us. We've got all 3 markets down, so that's a red, please, on the board. The Nasdaq has been hit hardest. It was a rough day. FANG's lost most of all, and we'll see exactly why, and within the FANG brigade, who lost the most. But as you, with a 1.5, a 2%, a 1.4, keep an eye, particularly on the Dow in this last hour. The tradition has been, this is when the market makers and when the big institutional investors decide how they want to go into overnight. In the Express, Peter Tuchman told me there's plenty of investors to worry about.
There is anxiety in the market. We've seen that. We hit a down 1,300 points over 2 days. We saw a rally back of 900, and we see a pause in consolidation. Okay? There are headline-driven anxiety into the market, right? The Mnuchin story, there was a Treasury auction that went sort of poorly. Okay? So there's some, the buyers who are sitting back, there's a bid in the market. Okay? We saw that as the market rebounded from the sell-off.
But why should the market particularly sell off on the back of Mnuchin?
But a 320-point sell-off on a headline, it's anxiety because we don't know. Look, we're being told that Saudi Arabia is a very close business ally and an international ally relative to our relationship with Iran and whatnot in Syria and Yemen. Okay, so this could be opening a door to a confrontation. Markets don't like confrontation. It causes anxiety, right? So they're making a statement by not sending him, in my opinion.
Right, and
whatever your politics is.
Yes, no, absolutely. But the interesting thing is that the VIX suddenly shoots up more than 12, 14%, which is to be expected.
All right.
The market has always traded on headlines, but the volatility exacerbates that and makes it much more extreme.
Well, but that's the market we're in right now
Today,
at the moment.
Yes.
That's the market we're in general.
Yes.
But a 350-point move in a market today that's been moving up and down thousands of points within a week's time is not that much more. This market can rebound.
The market rebounding doesn't seem to be any evidence of that at the moment, but there is still another 30-odd, 40 minutes to go. In the last few minutes, we're hearing that the Fox Business Network, one of Saudi Conference's last remaining media partners, has now pulled out, as Steve Mnuchin also pulls out, and Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, is playing for time. He said Saudi Arabia needs a few more days to investigate. And the Secretary of State stressed that the US and Saudi Arabia have important ties that must be maintained.
I told President Trump this morning that we ought to give them a few more days to complete that so that we, too, have a complete understanding of the facts surrounding that, at which point we can make decisions about how or if the United States should respond to the incident surrounding Mr. Khashoggi. I think it's important for us all to remember, too, we have a long, since 1932, a long strategic relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They continue to be an important counterterrorism partner. They have custody of the two holy sites. They are an important strategic alliance of the United States, and we need to be mindful of that as well.
John Defterios is in Abu Dhabi. Jeremy Diamond is at the White House. Jeremy, to you first. The thing that struck me there about what the Secretary of State was saying, and maybe because he's in charge of diplomacy, he rested his reasons on strategic Islam, the military alliance, all those areas. Not a whiff or a word from him about contracts.
That is true, but it is certainly in keeping with the administration's line that the U.S.-Saudi relationship is a crucial one, and it is one both important not only because of those military contracts that the president has really focused his attention on, but really because of the broader regional implications. Its support for counterterrorism programs helmed by the United States, its role in confronting Iran in the Middle East. And so certainly that has been the reasoning, but some critics have said that that is essentially giving away much of the U.S.'s leverage on the public diplomacy front, that perhaps now is not the time to stress the importance of that relationship, but rather to kind of tighten the vice a little bit on Saudi Arabia as we await some kind of explanation from them for the disappearance of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who has been missing now for 2 weeks after entering that Saudi consulate and is believed, of course, to be killed.
John Defterios, Mnuchin's no longer going. A few other European finance ministers no longer going. Fox Business News no longer a media partner. Any whiff that the Saudis may say, all right, let's just cancel it?
Well, there's not a lot of information coming out of Riyadh, Richard. I've been on the phone and emailing and texting all week long. We don't have a list of the speakers or the attendees at this stage, but sources tell me that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is determined to proceed. And I've had some other input from very senior people here in the Gulf that's saying that while the West is criticizing the Crown Prince, the Gulf states are rallying around. But internally in Saudi Arabia, they like the idea that he's plowing ahead with the event. But let's be very candid here. Mnuchin is the biggest defector so far. Many in the region thought he would be attending. 3 ministers outside of Mnuchin, all from the West today. The Trade Secretary of the UK and the finance ministers of both France and Holland deciding to duck out. It was a very bad week. We had 25 major defections. The people that we'd normally see at the World Economic Forum in Davos, very proud to be in Saudi Arabia last year. They're not going this year, Richard. So they're going to try to put a brave face on it, try to maintain their contacts, remain engaged, send perhaps lower level people. But I thought the message from the White House almost immediately after Mnuchin said he wasn't going, they made it very clear nobody else from the U.S. government's going as well. That is even a stronger signal in my view. They're not even trying to tiptoe around it. They're hitting it quite blunt. We're not going right now. Wrong signal, wrong time.
Okay, well, Jeremy Diamond, take on board what John Defterios has just said. Is that the tenor, or are they caught in a damned if they do, damned if they don't? Let's do the least we can so that we're not overly criticized, but still keep a door open for the future.
Well, this decision to not send Mnuchin is certainly a significant one, and it's the most significant reaction that we've seen from this administration so far in response to these events. But at the same time, we know that the president was waiting to see what other countries would do first. And the decision by Mr. Mnuchin's counterparts in France and the United Kingdom, we're told, was a crucial one to ultimately his decision today to pull out. The president did not want Secretary Mnuchin to be the first of those counterparts to pull out of this conference, really waiting to see what was happening. And we saw a series of major company CEOs, other countries pulling out before the United States ultimately did, when it realized that it did not want to be left alone in the camp of attending this conference, going through with it amid all of these questions and criticism.
Jeremy and John, thank you. We're going to follow deeper into this question, the same one I talked about last night on the profitable moment. This issue of CEOs and companies, the moral compass, and when do you put values beyond commercial contracts? As more ministers drop out of the summit, top companies from those same countries are being cagey. John mentioned the French and the Dutch finance ministers and the UK trade ministers saying, nope, they're not go. Bruno Le Maire of France says that will not hurt French relations with the Saudis. Many businesses, though, are keeping relations intact. Now, these 8 firms are still listed as strategic partners in the Future Investment Initiative, even though they may not send their CEO. In other words, they are attempting to have their cake and eat it by remaining connected, but not at the highest levels. David Back says doing business with Saudi has always been fraught with difficulties. The professor who teaches at the Yale School of Management joins me now. Professor, good to see you, sir. Thank you. I was reading your interesting comments on this. They are damned if they do and damned if they don't. But what should be the guiding principle for whether or not they go?
Yeah, it's good to be with you as well. Thanks for this coverage. Look, you know, values is not something that you put on your website or in your annual reports. It's what you live. It's what guides your decisions, your actions when things are difficult. And right now is an opportunity for CEOs to signal what their values are and what their companies are all about. And, you know, this is a pretty easy but important signal to send to not participate in the summit.
All right, not participate. But here's the hypocrisy. You don't send the CEO, but you send the assistant managing director or the CFO or the COO, or you send a significantly high enough rep that you don't completely piss off the Saudis.
That's right. I mean, that's the pragmatic approach, and that's where it really gets much more difficult. The easy decision is not to send the CEO, not to have the photo op with the Crown Prince. The much more difficult decision is, do you forego this incredible business opportunity? Saudi Arabia wants to change its economy, is looking for foreign investment. There are a lot of opportunities here that have been long very interesting to these companies. And so the really important question isn't who goes and who doesn't go anymore. The really important question becomes, what do you do after this? What happens next? And how do you adapt your engagement with the country?
Yeah, so talk us through that. Let us assume, for the purposes of this next question, that it is proven that the Saudi regime or Saudi government did in some shape or form have links to the death or to the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. Yeah. What does a company do? The realpolitik versus the desirable or the wanted. What would you do? What's your guiding principle?
Yeah. So, well, the guiding principle, I think, for a lot of these companies, as much as we talk about, this should be about their values, they're doing risk assessments. And one of the factors that is becoming increasingly important is reputation risk in this, hyper-political, social media, always news-covered environment. They're thinking about what the cost and benefits look like. And, losing the support of other customers, losing in particular the commitment of employees is an increasingly important factor shaping the decision. So my hypothesis is that this is going to vary across companies, it's going to vary across industries, but particularly those companies that are consumer-facing, that have a lot of millennial employees, the tech companies, some of the financial services companies. For them, it's going to be much harder to sort of go back to business.
So at what point does a company have to hold its nose at the stench of hypocrisy and continue to do work with, whether it be Saudi Arabia or whether it be one of the states in the US on the bathroom ban or whatever it might, whatever the moral issue is, at what point does a company have to stomach it and hold its nose?
I don't think a company has to do it at all. I mean, I think a company can say, and that's what a lot of companies say, we're doing more good than harm by being there, by engaging. And I think this is what companies wanted to do with Saudi Arabia. They seemed excited about the direction of change. They had a lot of hope for the Crown Prince. And this is so difficult for them because suddenly it looks like those hopes may have been misplaced.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you very much. We'll talk more about this. Companies,
thank you.
CEOs as the new moral barometers is something we talk a lot about on this programme, and we'll talk to you about it in the future. Thank you, sir. As we continue tonight on Quest Means Business, no sign of a Brexit deal, and Britain and the EU, it was dragging out the process for another year, possibly, to the consternation of those who want to leave now, not later.